Okay, so the pandemic taught travel firms about resilience, flexibility, how to hold on to customers and cope with rapid change. But what have we learned for keeps, and what challenges are still to come, including obvious issues like automation and sustainability? So I'll start with you, Peter, from TUI. Probably amongst the panelists here had the most disruption between 2020 and, well, probably this year and continuing. But can you tell me what happened to TUI that, well, so many things happened to TUI. Run me through those briefly and how you had to cope with those instant issues that had to be resolved.
Yeah, sure. So in TUI we work in tourism. So tourism per se means we not managing tourism, we're managing crisis, right? Because there's always a crisis anywhere in the world, so we're very good at managing crisis. So our business model is actually vertically integrated. It means we control and we offer products to our customers, but we also produce these products end-to-end, vertical integration. So this gives us a good leverage on risk capacity that we own because we have a diversification, right? So we have different source markets. So this means the markets where our customers are coming from. So UK is a source market, Germany is a source market, and then we have destination markets. Now in the destinations, we have hotels, for example, in Spain and Turkey. And of course, as I said, there's always a crisis, right? Sometimes, excuse me, there's a crisis in Turkey, a political crisis, for example, and customers don't want to go to Turkey. So then we can offer an alternative destination, Spain, for example, right? And therefore, this diversification in destination works extremely well. But it also works on the source market side because if there's a crisis and a recession in the UK, we have a lot of customers in the US. There's not such a big recession these days, and therefore the customer demand is just shifting from UK to US, for example. So this diversification helps us on both sides actually to manage our business model. Now, as you said, the crisis wasn't a particular challenge because for the first time, all of our source markets were in crisis and all of our destination markets were in crisis. And that was a huge challenge. Of course, we had to react very fast. What we saw at the end of the day is that we had a very big shift of the customer base towards inland travel. So similar to the UK and in Germany, you have seen inland travel in Spain. You have seen inland travel in Turkey. You've seen inland travel in Greece. So if I look at our hotel business, we achieved quite nice occupancies during the crisis. No one would expect because the travelers from abroad were just substituted by inland demand. So therefore, the diversified model from that perspective helped as well. And then, of course, we had a lot of changes to our product offering. We have models like workation, so people were choosing to work from the destination and not come home to their markets where there was lockdown and curfew, and therefore they decided to stay in a nice sunny beach hotel and work from there. So we had to invest in our Wi-Fi equipment, we had to invest in our product offering a lot, but it played out very well. So therefore we were able to manage the crisis quite well given the circumstances, but of course it was a big external shock that we had to handle.
And you had to throw money at issues because you couldn't afford that reputational loss. But there are practical, as I understand it, effects of having to charter more planes on standby. Normally you'd have 4 planes in the UK on standby. This time you had 9.
Yes.
The cost of €1 million a month to hire a plane in, simply because you couldn't rely or depend on those 4 planes being pulled out all over the place. Yeah. That must be huge.
It's a very good point. So, I mean, as I said before, we own 420 hotels. We also own 150 aircrafts on our own. And that's an important distinction between other operators in the market. And that helped us actually to use our aircraft capacity to bring people where they needed to be, right? So we had to adapt our flight plan all the time. It was actually a nightmare to do all the calculations and to recalculate all the flight plans all the time, but at least we had the ability to react. Other companies that don't own aircraft capacity were not as quick in reacting to it. So part of the agility in our crisis management has to do with this vertical integration, owning everything, customers, aircrafts, hotels, transportation in the destination, and therefore for us it's much easier to manage then a travel end-to-end to the destination and back. And therefore also in the ramp-up, our business was coming back very, very quickly because we were able to manage it much more from one hand and not from multiple suppliers. And And therefore also the standby is an important element because you need to have enough flexibility in your resources to react to the changes that come overnight.
Okay, thank you for that. Joss, UK inbound, I think you had something like 340 members when the pandemic struck. Domestic travel has been alluded to, but that didn't help your membership. What happened to that?
So there we were in February. We held our annual convention down in Bristol, real seas, a real feeling that it was going to be another record year in 2020. I was chatting to one of my colleagues and she said, I don't think this is anything to worry about. I think we've got to worry more around some of the Brexit problems that were coming to the surface. I wasn't so sure because I've been through foot and mouth disease, 9/11, terrorism attacks, all of these different types of crises over the years. We were actually at 417 members. We're now back up to 340. A really difficult time. And I think, the first thing that happens is you've got to stop. You've got to think. You've got to think about what the problem really is before you start to do anything at all. And calling on wise minds, we knew that a huge amount of the prospects for inbound tourism were tied up with outbound tourism. So the first thing that we needed to do, and that's for two reasons. Obviously, we use the same kit, we use the same airplanes, we use the same airports. But as much as anything else, outbound tourism, the government cares about because it's British citizens. Cares less about it in terms of the inbound side. Obviously, they love the foreign exchange that we generate. But it was all about British citizens. So we knew that working with colleagues in outbound associations, whether it's LATA or PATA or ABTA, that there was a real requirement for us to work together so that government could get a single voice about tourism rather than fragmented voices.
We'll talk more about that in a minute, but the immediate impact, I think, was all the inbound Chinese tour operators into the UK got wiped out effectively.
Yeah, that's right. We had a lot of members who were kind of one-man bands concentrated on the Chinese market, and nothing was coming through from China. Obviously, we started to see other markets slowly decrease as more and more restrictions got put into place. A lot of those operators actually went on to sell PPE, so they found another part of the economy that they could work in. And of course, if you're a trade association and you're getting no inbound tourism, it's very easy to scrap out the line. And we did lose a lot of members. But everyone we talked to, it wasn't because they didn't want to be a member, it was because they simply had no revenue coming into the books and therefore had to move out. I'm delighted to say we've had our best year ever in terms of recruitment, and now we're back up to our levels. But it really did show that if you're a trade association whose revenues rely solely upon membership subscriptions or upon event delivery, and then you have a global pandemic, that is going to put you in a very challenging place. One of the key learnings for us was, as I say, working with others, but it was also around getting onto the front foot in terms of our lobbying and our advocacy activity, because then our members could see what we were doing on their behalf.
Again, we will come on to that in a bit, because I'm very interested in that area. But moving on to Cheers Ventures, I think you were also set for your best year ever, Brian, in 2020. That went. What I'm interested in is, as you settled in, you worked out the staff, you started data bashing to work out what the trends were as we came back more to a sensible area, if you like. What did you find when you looked in your data to see how you could recover from that?
Yeah, I think importantly for us is once the dust has settled down and we're very clearly into this for the long term, the aspect of there's one bit of making sure you're still relevant from a customer perspective, from the marketing that we were putting in, it was about reassurance and about traveling when the world opens back up. So we were very conscious of how that messaging came across to our consumer base. But at the same time, one of the key bits is that, we have a very big website. It has lots and lots of customers utilizing it. So we started to look at, as we start to come out of this, what are our customers going to be looking for? So when we started to look at the data, it's very clear that when you go into lockdown, the only thing you're allowed to do is go for a walk for 1 hour a day. People reconnect with nature. They get back out into the outdoors, and people were getting fit again. So what we started to see is that, coupled with that, the fact that I think you take travel away from people, and they start to realise that actually, probably travel was taken for granted a little bit, and people start to appreciate what travel's all about. And there are a number of people that we all have a list and we say, one day I'd like to do this. Now that may well be, go see a destination, do a safari or climb Mount Kilimanjaro or something. It's on a bucket list of things to do. And what we saw is that a lot of people started searching for things. So Kilimanjaro being a great example, suddenly really spiked in our search terms. And we always think, something the matter with the site, this cannot be right, but it continued constantly, and we did everything to look at it. And then we started seeing other things like safaris, so people were clearly at that point with one mind on, when we get out of this, then we definitely want to travel with an experience.
Is that when you started introducing hiking holidays as your first comeback?
Well, that was part, so there was this part of, the trend analysis. The other aspect is that myself and the team, we sat down and said, look, in this pandemic, once things start to open up, where are they going to open? It was quite clear to us that long haul was going to take a little bit longer, just because it took them longer probably to get a control of the situation. Whereas we knew that in Europe, out of the UK and our European marketplace, most of that airlift by the low-cost carriers, the TUIs, the Jet2s of this world, are going to go into beach destinations, and we're not well known for having any product in those areas. So we knew that Europe would open up in that respect, so we started to look and say, okay, if Ibiza opens, or Tenerife, or Crete, or Corfu, which it will do, even though there'll be restriction on, testing and such like, they're going to travel because people have been, held down in the airlifts in that area. So then we started to say, well, what could we do in those areas? So there was lots of talk in our industry, in our sector, about opening up, hiking tours in Scotland and such like, but we add no value to that, in my honest opinion. We're very good at hiking tours, a tour overseas with a CEO that's dedicated to that tour 24/7. So we looked at places like Ibiza and said, there's this part of Ibiza which everyone knows, the hedonistic nightclubbing aspect, but there's a really stunning part to Ibiza that you can do a trek, through that part of the island. Likewise in Corfu, there's a trek from the north of the island that goes through the centre of the island down to the south. Crete, you've got the Massamaya Gorge. So there's lots of these places that have the opportunity. We've just never really looked at it properly.
So you'd never done those sort of
No,
holidays?
not at all. No, nobody had done those sort of
things. That was an example of taking that, switching it around, what's going to open up, and now go for these holidays. Holidays that you're still featuring?
Sorry, what was that?
Holidays that you're still featuring in your itinerary?
Yes, they are. No. So when we look at building product, we don't just build for one source market because we're a global business. So when we bring product in, it has to be relevant for North American market, our Australian market, even though that was much later to come back into the play. So what I'm pleased about is that, we developed a great product that fitted into the existing European program, was majorly successful coming out of the pandemic. And actually what that's done is we've now added even more tours into Europe. So in the past, Europe, for our UK market, would probably sit, when we look at ranking of, Peru, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, etc., would be down in number 15 or 16. And actually, as we've come through and out, Europe's jumped up into our number 5, number 6, and it's staying there. Okay. Now, I think there's a reason for that to do with cost of living and such likes, but yeah, it's been very successful.
Guy, you're Global Business Travel Director at Advantage Travel Partnerships. Business travel stopped. When it started to come back, you saw some quite different attitudes towards traveling at that time. It wasn't going back to what it was before. It had moved on. What did you see, and what figures can you give us today about the new look of business travel?
Yeah, it's when you say business travel stopped, it did very largely stop. But the picture obviously was very varied. Those of our members who were looking after companies who specialise in healthcare or pharmaceuticals or oil and gas, bits of it continued, and it all kind of came back at a different rate in a different way. But in terms of the trends, if you like, since it's really opened up again, I think probably the most noticeable thing is the nature and the duration of the trips. So pre-pandemic, an average business trip would last about 4.5 days. It got longer during the pandemic, understandably, because people were having to wait around and get quarantined and all sorts of things. But actually, since we come out of the pandemic, that length of trip has continued to increase, up to nearly 7 days at the moment. And there's, you can speculate as to what that's for, but certainly talking to a lot of large corporate accounts, there is this new feeling, and I think it's a mixture of sustainability, of traveller well-being, of cost to an extent, which is travel less, but get more out of your trips.
So instead of those multiple trips a month, you
Yeah.
do one trip and you catch up with all the people you want to see in a longer trip.
And do you think this is something that is a sea change, or is it going to go back to let's pop off and see a mate in Brussels tomorrow?
It's hard to say. I think probably the only thing the last few years has taught us, making predictions is a slightly dangerous game. But certainly the intent when you talk to travel managers and travel procurement specialists in corporate organizations is that's how they want to travel. It ticks a box on sustainability.
Yeah.
There is, and certainly a lot of the data from the States at the moment is saying that all of us who've got used to working from home, we not necessarily want to be hopping on a plane every week anymore. We've got out of those habits, and we would rather travel a little bit less, but for a longer time and slightly more purposeful. There's a slight knockback against that. I know talking to people last month, they're saying our policy is now we should travel less but travel for longer. But when you try and get a hotel at an affordable rate in Europe, you decide that actually, no, I'm going to go out and back in a day. So we're seeing little fluctuations depending on capacity and depending on price.
Yeah.
But the overall intent, I think, both of companies but also of their travelers, is that that's slightly less time in transit and more time in those trips, having meetings and so on. And that is going to, I think, lead to that trend to continue, yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Richard, you set up Green Traveller as a website in 2005 to promote sustainable travel, low impact travel. I think you have a point of view as well on this pandemic actually not being beneficial for sustainable travel, but it's given it a bit of a recalibration.
I think that's right, yeah, 2005 seems a long time ago now, doesn't it? But I think if the pandemic had hit us 10 years ago, the reaction we've had to it now would have been very different back then. And I think that there's been such a change in the public awareness of things like climate change, of over-tourism, of the nature emergency, that back then I think business would have probably been back to normal. Whereas now I think there's been a sea change, and people are seeing this as an opportunity that actually to reconsider how we manage tourism, how we do it. And that's not necessarily consumer-led. There's still the jury's out on whether consumers are demanding this new way of travel. I think there are certain areas where that could be the case, but largely I think that there isn't much evidence for that yet. But I think where the real difference is coming is in the boardroom, and investors and the city are kind of demanding this. And that's a sea change to what probably would have happened 10 years ago.
So you're thinking the industry is leading this more than consumers at the moment?
I do, I think so, yeah. And I think that, we have TUI here, huge vertically integrated company. A lot of the industry isn't vertically integrated, and there isn't much joined up thinking. There isn't an industry with a communal body that lobbies together, and it's very difficult to have that.
Yeah.
So I think that, you've got separate. The hospitality industry is very separate to the airline industry, and yet collectively we're all part of this travel and tourism industry trying to address these very big global problems.
We'll come on to Joss speaking about collaboration in a minute. But from TUI's point of view, you clearly are very well aware of sustainability. You're buying new aircraft in, which you can tell me a bit about that. But do you take Richard's point as well? Do you think if this had happened 10 years ago, we would have gone back to the way we were? Now, sustainability is going to play very much a factor in forward planning.
Yeah,
TUI.
I mean, we look at it from a strategy perspective. So in strategy, we have a concept that's called SWOT analysis, right? And we always ask ourselves, is sustainability a threat or an opportunity? And for us, the answer is very clear. It is a massive opportunity. I mean, what a lot of people don't know, but the business cases in sustainability are very, very attractive. So if we switch, for example, from diesel production on our hotel islands, for example, the Maldives, to solar production of energy, the business case, I mean, the cashback is within 3 years. So the return on invested capital is massive. And a lot of people confuse cost with investment. So what we're saying is the investment has such a high return that we, from a business perspective, want to offer a better product to our customers. We don't actually feel the customers pushing us. It's the other way around. We push the customers to our more greener products. And that also holds true for the airline. Of course, the airline per se is a very difficult industry to become more efficient. In Europe, we have the most efficient fleet, which is important that you have the latest technology, which is more efficient, more greener. We're also working, of course, on a connected trip. So we have now a cooperation with the island of Rhodes. So Rhodes dependency on tourism is 98%. So we work with the local government, Greek government in Rhodes, so to create the first carbon neutral destination. So what we're working on is really a carbon neutral trip. Not only the flight, not only the hotel, but the entire package needs to become neutral. But as I said, I mean, all the business cases we look at, they really yielding very, very high returns, and that's why we're very much committed to invest on the product side to make everything greener.
Okay, very good. But Joss, I cut you off earlier, but what you're alluding to, and I think this is interesting, was your cooperation with ABTA now, and not treating outbound, inbound as completely separate areas, but sharing airports, sharing aircraft. This has led you to work together with ABTA on calling it international travel, which I think is a very interesting collaboration. Do you see more of that sort of work tying up all the other bodies in travel as well to work as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of ABTA, there's always these tensions in terms of inbound, outbound, which is worth more, which is employing more people, whether it's for international customers or domestic customers. But it's been really important on sort of 2 or 3 levels. The first of which is that true collaboration, that government wants to hear one voice. They don't want to hear multiple voices. We may have different areas. I have very little interest in FCDO guidance internationally. But my colleagues at ABTA or Advantage or wherever, they have very little interest in terms of visas for overseas visitors to travel to the UK. But I would say 80% of what we're talking about when it comes to traffic light systems or restrictions, they're absolutely the same. So making sure that we are relevant to government and that government is hearing our voices. What's also been quite interesting is working through and with each other as well, because other trade associations may have links through to, say, for example, aviation. We don't necessarily have those. I have links through to the tourism minister, through to the culture, through to the heritage. I may have links through number 10 business centre. So it's finding out who's got those links. The other really important thing about working in collaboration and partnership is it was a truly, truly terrible time for members. Actually, personally, it was a very, very difficult time as well. And to be able to establish those relationships with other industry associations who are having the same issues, the same problems, angry members, threats of their businesses disappearing that they spent 20 years building up. And so actually having that kind of support network, that friendship, the ability to bounce ideas off each other has been critically important. And the report that you referenced that we talked about, that we released last week with ABTA, is absolutely a legacy of COVID, of us working in partnership for the benefit of tourism.
Which goes with the title of the session, the ability, the agility in the times of crisis, just forged partnerships which possibly would not have been on the table before. So before 2020, I think you said when we had a chat, 90% of your time was spent generating ROI with partnerships, looking after your members. Now it's pivoted to 90% lobbying, advocacy work, which is, Guy, from the Advantage point of view, that's exactly what Advantage Travel Partnership wants to be seen more as a lobbying group as well. Do you see more of these synergies where the industry in the UK and abroad works as a whole together?
Absolutely, and it's something that, we were very vocal in during the pandemic. I think we all got used to seeing my CEO, Julia, on the telly all the time. It's quite disturbing, actually, when you get in the shower in the morning, the first voice you hear coming out of the radio is your boss. But I learned to live with that. But no, certainly, I think sometimes people talk about this idea of the industry speaking with one voice. And I think, as Joss has explained, we have different perspectives on it. We're never going to speak with just one voice, but I think what we are doing much more now is getting aligned with the message and making sure that the people who need to know, those in government, are hearing a common story from us. There will be different perspectives, and there's going to be different organisations and different voices, but that we're all pulling in the same direction. And I certainly have seen a lot more of that, particularly in the last 12 months. Yeah.
Richard, I guess that would work to your agenda as well. You want to see the people, you want to deal with one body, not 15 different types of...
Yeah, that's right. And I think, the destinations, we've heard about inbound, outbound, and the host markets, and also how we can actually do this. But I think if you look at the destinations, they're hugely powerful. Tour operators can only do a certain amount. It's the destinations that have a real strength in this, and they are beginning to make movements. And just in the last couple of months, we've seen 2 of the biggest tourist boards in terms of outbound markets from the UK, Greece and Spain, both launching sustainable hubs. And they put a big amount of time thinking about it and making sure that they're doing it properly. So, we're seeing a seismic shift in what the destinations are doing, and I think that's the thing that's been missing in the past.
That's great. Brian, you're a social enterprise tour operator. You've been in this game a long time. So if Richard's saying people like Spain and Greece now are creating hubs of sustainable product. Basically, just identifying what's good that you can contract if you haven't done so already. That's got to be good. But I'm also intrigued to hear more about your change in the pandemic of reassessing your own internal workings and looking at diversity in particular. And you gave me some examples of looking at all your photographs and literature to making sure you're sending out the right signals as well.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that exercise?
Yeah, I mean, so before the pandemic come into play, one of the things that was really important to us as a business, we're a very diverse company, we have a very diverse workforce, but at the same time, diversity, inclusion, etc., really important to us as a business. So it was something that we were starting to look at. And actually, one of the benefits that come from a pandemic, our boss or an owner came up with this, never waste a good pandemic. I mean, I think he made that up in his own right, because I've never heard that term before. But what it did do was allow us to look at this properly and say, right, if we're going to be serious about this as an organisation, how are we going to do it? So we have a diversity and inclusion group that have come together, and they look at every aspect. So the real, some examples of that is, the photography that we put out on our socials or in our brochures or any marketing campaigns. Are they representative of the people that travel and book with G Adventures? Likewise, the naming of some of the tours, So there's a lot of work that's being done.
Can you give me an example perhaps of renaming a tour?
Well, they're still going through it at the moment, so I couldn't give you one specific, because their role is to look at all of that and say, look, does that represent, that tour? Is it the wording that we're using? Is it the right wording? So there's a lot of that work that's ongoing currently. So I think that's an example of. The other aspect is recruitment. We need to get more diverse people into our organisation. I think that opens up much better skill set. So there's the old adage, isn't it? If you continue to fish where you fish, you're only going to get what you get at that point. So we have to look at it and say, if we really are serious, then we're going to have to think about what is the advert, what's the language in that job recruitment advert, where are we placing that? Is it going to get a diverse enough, application base coming back into it?
Yeah.
So there's loads and loads of things that, during the pandemic, that group have been able to take a look at and think about. Prior to pandemic, part of our business that really makes our business strong, I believe, is our culture. So we used to have a thing called a culture fit, which actually sort of horrifies me a little bit now thinking about it. But that was an example. Someone would go through their interview process, and then, anybody in our business, they would sit with those guys, and it would be a case of, do they fit within the organisation and our culture, etc. Now that has completely changed.
Is that
it's culture ad now.
Sorry, is that a process that had already been ongoing? Was it the fact you had the time to think and
I think
refresh?
I think to Bruce's analogy of not wasting a good pandemic, it gave us time. The world stopped at that point.
Yeah.
We weren't operating as such, so it allowed us as a business to say, okay, what are the really important things to us as a company that now we've got a bit of time? I mean, there's time and there's also trying to manage a business and get it through, but that did definitely, I think, when the world paused, it allowed us to reflect harder and think smarter about some of the things that we'd wanted to do, so it accelerated our journey on those
Thank
things.
you. Peter, did TUI have any time to reflect on sort of internal culture or way of thinking, staffing? Was all crisis all the way through?
No, first of all, it was crisis for sure, because our business very much depends on outbound travel, so we have to fly customers to sunny destinations, and of course, if there's a decision to shut the borders, then our business is just gone overnight. We own a lot of risk capacity, own aircrafts, own hotels, own cruise ships, so we had to be extremely fast in reacting to this massive challenge. In terms of diversity, I would say, we are a very diversified company because we own, as I said, businesses in the source markets, but also in the destinations. We have 20,000 people working abroad. It's more people than working in the UK are working abroad in the destinations. So therefore, it's a really diverse footprint. The main challenge was really the switch overnight to, let's say, virtual working, because we had to of course, work from home. So we had to be super agile in adjusting the way of working, which we did. So we used all the technology available, MS Teams and so on, so it worked extremely well, but there was an adjustment. And what I personally find very challenging also now as a manager after the crisis, where you see a lot of more hybrid working, because the way of working has adjusted in all companies, is the inclusion point at the end of the day. So if you hire new people, the onboarding process is a lot more challenging, right? So the people are not sitting next to you, they're not being trained every day in the office, speaking to people, hearing about problem solving. So it's a massive challenge for us
You
now.
still got a lot of ongoing.
Which will be ongoing in the future. But then there's also, in terms of diversity and trends, we have this new trend of work-wide. That's how we call it. So in our company, everybody can work from anywhere now. So a lot of people choose to go to Mallorca or a sunny destination. They stay in our hotel. And then they work from our hotel, and after work, of course, they can enjoy the hotel and the facilities and everything.
Huge transformation.
It's a huge transformation. So we started with our own stuff, and now we see actually demand from other companies to copy this model, because it gives a lot more flexibility to people. Of course, everything has to be built on trust. People have to work and not abuse the system. But I think in a modern world of hybrid working, this will become a very interesting business for us going forward as well, not only for our own employees.
Good point. So Richard, in conversation the other day, mentioned about rail. Rail deregulation in Europe is creating a lot more potential for travel, and I think it probably touches on all of you in different ways about the prospect for more rail travel, slow travel, obviously sustainable travel. Tell me a bit more about that, Richard, and then Guy for business travel, Brian for tour operating, Joss for cooperation, Tui for rail aircraft. It could work on all of you, so get me off.
Well, I mean, you're right, the deregulation, it happened before the lockdown, and I think a lot of investment went into the railways in Europe before the lockdown that wasn't quite realised because of the pause. But actually now we're seeing that investment happening, and there are any number of rail routes. Dozens of new rail routes happening, overnight sleeper services. There's a new initiative called Midnight Trains is running, hoping to run a dozen sleeper trains from Paris in 2024, starting then. But also we're hearing things like hearing from Tui about the change in people working from home. There are companies like Hotel Plan, who own several leading travel companies, are now offering employees a day or extra time, paid time, to travel by train rather than airplane, to make up for the time that they're going to lose by taking the slower, more sustainable route to their holiday. So it's not penalising them for taking the greener choice. So I think that's another big step that's happening. And and it's also not just in rail, it's looking at other types of overland travel. And I think that what's happening in Europe has been happening a long time. And we've just seen very recently how Lumo is competing for the London to Edinburgh route. And we've seen this, in the last decade in Madrid and Barcelona routes and Milan and Rome. This has been happening already for a long time in Europe, and this country is really, it's a totally different experience when you get to Europe. And I think that the opportunity is really happening now, and it's exciting times ahead, actually, for that kind of travel.
Is that more up your agenda?
Completely. And as Richard says, it's been happening in Europe for a while. I think out of practicality as much as anything. We're high-speed rail routes. We instantly see the volume of air travel drop on those. But certainly with the big push, and I agree completely with Richard, 10 years ago you talked about it and it was an aspirational, vague concept. We want to be more sustainable. Now companies are having to do it. And actually the rail travel element is something where they can put a hard and fast rules and applicable policies. Trying to get people to fly a bit less is hard because you still need to have those trips, you need to meet people. But putting in a rule that says, if you're on a domestic route or if you're on one of these routes, you have to take the train. And if you fly, it's out of policy and your SVP has to approve the trip. These are some very concrete things that companies are able to put in place straight away that really drive the changes in behaviour. Yeah. It's happening more in Europe. I think having last week done a trip to Glasgow and back on Avanti West Coast, I'm not sure that's a great advert at the moment for it being a comparable option in the UK, but it's where it's heading. And we are starting to see a lot of companies now saying domestic travel is rail only, and it's a very measurable and achievable start on that route that a lot of companies have got towards sustainable travel policy.
Brian, rail?
So where are we? I'm trying to think. 3-4 years ago, we had inserts in our brochure with, rail journeys as a travel style, and a number of tours that, were based around travelling using rail. So we have a number of tours in our portfolio that use rail as a means of connecting from one part of a tour to another, etc. I think the other aspect is that people are going to travel. It's just making sure that they think differently about it rather than taking 2 flights to get to a destination, because it may well save them some money, is take the longer flight rather than 2 flights. Travel for longer rather than going to a destination for a very short period of time, actually get immersed in the destination and stay for longer, therefore reducing down that carbon footprint as well. So I think there's a number of things that can be done in that area that we support.
Is it
as
on
a
your
business.
list for the next year or two?
Sorry?
Is it high on your list in the next year or two?
Of,
All your ideas you've got coming up?
in terms of rail?
Yeah, great.
I think we look at product constantly, and we look at what we do as a business and the impact that it has. If the 2 things have to go in tandem: demand in terms of where the customer wants to go, and the opportunity at that point into making sure that how they travel around, can we do it in a way that's sustainable and has the least impact on the environment.
Josh, quickly, anything on your schedule, agenda?
Well, I think it'd be difficult for me to sit here and extol the virtues of rail travel in the UK, given what we're going through at the moment. But actually, what's really interesting is if you survey international visitors, actually rail travel within the UK comes up really highly. But that's probably because they're not necessarily travelling during all those peak hours in terms of commuter hours. There's 2 sort of issues that I think we've got. The first of which is the most European countries, you turn up in Paris, you head to the Gare Montparnasse and you think, I'm going to have a day trip down to Blois, see the chateau, lovely, you buy your ticket. That's very difficult to do in the UK without paying a huge amount, so we've got to get that bit right.
Yeah.
And the next bit is probably actually around the sustainability bit, is how do we get that last mile right? That's the problem here in the UK. You can get up to Oxenholme, 2.5, 3 hours, fantastic, Lake District, wonderful experience. How do you get from Oxenholme to Coniston?
Yeah.
And that's the difficulty. It's that last mile that we need to get right, and we need to be providing, whether it is, whether it's electric vehicles for people, but that people are increasingly looking for that sustainable element, but we've got to get that last mile right. Okay. Particularly, again, we don't have the public investment in buses that we have in our competitor destinations. So we're not quite getting it right, but certainly the train companies are making huge endeavours to develop passes relevant to their customers, building on that sustainability element.
Very good, thank you. We're moving on fast. I'm going to ask the guys to give me their one tip that they've learned, sort of how to be agile in a time of a crisis. I think you've heard a lot of examples of how you've changed track, the way it's recalibrating the travel business, the way the thinking is changing. But I would like to ask anybody like to ask a question or two from the audience. As you know, we've got the mics out there. We've got a lot of knowledge out here on the platform today, ranging across all specters of the travel sector. Anybody asking about agility, what they should be doing, how they have adapted in the crisis? Nobody out there going to stick their hands up? Okay, no, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so come back to the panel then. Richard, we'll start with you. Of all the things we covered today, and I'm sure we could spend a lot more time talking about them, but agility in the time of crisis, how, in your mind, is the green sustainable lobbying changed its way of promoting itself, or thinking about how is the best way to encourage consumer as well as industry?
Well, I think it's not a new thing, is it? Sustainable tourism, sustainability across, not just in the tourism industry, across all industries, across all lifestyle. But I think there's increasing acceptance that actually the tourism industry is very fractured. To actually create a sustainable tourism industry, let's forget about the individualness of it all. It's actually about developing tourism in a way that fits with the entire sustainability agenda of how the world is moving.
Sure.
And I think that's the fundamental thing. I think it's very easy to be inward-looking on the tourism industry, look at the airlines and point the finger at them, and look at the operators or the accommodation, whatever it is. I think the whole, collectively, lifestyle has to change. We all have to move forward with whatever the big developments are in the rest of the world. And I think that's the future, is how we look at this, is that how can you actually, in terms of things like carbon pricing, is that going to happen? And if so, it's not just an airline issue, it's an issue for the cement industry, for the fisheries, for every other kind of industry. So I think we have to look at tourism within the greater context of everything else to deliver true sustainability.
That's absolutely right, and I phrased the question completely wrongly, and I apologize. In your area of green travel, you do an awful lot of media, filming, videography. Is that changing at the moment? What are you seeing within your area of work, which is shifting away from where it was
Oh,
pre-pandemic?
well, I think the influencer market is huge, and I think that video has transformed the way we're telling these stories, and particularly about sustainability, which is quite a didactic, subject, can be quite dry, and actually showing these stories through video is a really compelling way. I mean, if you talk about food miles, it's one thing, but if you show a fisherman coming in with a local catch, cooking it in front of you, and then tourists going down and eating it, it's much more of a compelling story to tell. And I think that's the change. And it's not just the media doing that; it's the influencers, it's the general public picking up their iPhones and telling those stories.
Very good, thank you. Peter, over to you.
So I mean, for us, I'm a big believer in open market forces. So that means we provide products to our customer, but we give back the choice to our customers, right? So one of the big topics for us, and that also builds, of course, on agility and crisis, is the customer has, traditionally we had a package of one hotel and one flight, so a package of two, a combination of two, if you will. Right now we've expanded our product portfolio a lot. I mean, yesterday on the panel, we discussed experiences is the new luxury, so people are looking for experiences and no longer for sun and beach holidays, so therefore we have now a huge experience business within the group, and that opens up a lot more possibilities. So with the state-of-the-art technology we have today, you can actually create 6 billion combinations of our products. So instead of a combination of two, the customers have a vast choice to combine. So that can include rail travel, this can include air travel, this can include experiences. You can enter, as you said, Crete from the Samaria Gorge perspective, or a canoe tour, or you can say I want to go for a 2 weeks sun and beach holiday. But we have all the ingredients. It's just a mix of ingredients that our customers will be able to choose in the future, much more agile, much more dynamic. And that is also very important, of course, in crisis management, that we can offer our customers a lot of choices, and therefore it gives a lot of stability, of course, to tourism business.
Yeah, we haven't actually touched on automation as such, but it's there in everything that's happening at the moment. And packaging, as we talk about rail with hotels, all that stuff's going to become much easier. Yeah. Joss, I mean, you've pivoted in the last 2 years from ROI for membership into 90% lobbying. That's quite a shift in the last 2 years. I presume that's going to be more and more of that work.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, we're coming back to it and here's a classic example. We provide a platform for 55 of our partners to do business with international buyers, and isn't it wonderful to be back? You can't predict the unpredictable and you can't manage the unmanageable. Change is a constant now. It's not a one-time event. I'm sure if we're sat here in 4 or 5 years' time, we will have seen other crises come through as well. Yeah. So if I could give anyone a top tip, it's look after yourself. One of the fantastic legacies here is people's ability to talk about their mental health, the mental health of their colleagues, and the support they need. And you as leaders need to manage yourself so that you're fit and well for it, but you also need to make sure your team are as well.
That's very good. Brian?
I think that the owner of our business at the very start of the pandemic said that he was going to write a book. Right, okay, interesting at the start of the pandemic. Yeah. But that book really was a plea to all customers to think differently about how they travel, and think about traveling differently, to be able to make a better impact on the world, think about the type of travel, etc., etc. So I think, for us, I think it's really important that as we come out of this, that we do think differently about it, the impact that we make, and therefore there's lots of things that are happening within our own organisation at the moment to set us up for that, because I do think the shift that we're going to see, and it's happening slowly, is a more conscious traveller that will want to know that actually, ultimately, I want to go away to that destination to have an amazing holiday, but I want to know that by having an amazing time, I'm still doing good and a positive impact on the destination and the people of that destination. So I think that's really important. So what's going to happen, I believe, is that it's the tour operators and the travel companies that are going to have to step up and put these things into play to make positive impact, make positive change. And therefore what's going to happen is, rather than us having to educate the customer, they're going to just expect it. Yeah. It will become a given. And actually, if you don't do positive for the world, they won't travel with you in the future. So I think there's going to be a flip. It's incumbent on us at the moment to make those things happen. And what will happen is, actually, at some point, there'll be a turning point where the customer will say, if you don't do these things,
Yeah.
we ain't going to book with you.
Yeah, I
Okay,
agree.
good, thank you for that. And Guy, what are you going to aspire to change in the next year?
I think one of the things that this has really highlighted coming out of the pandemic is a message that we've probably been trumpeting for a long time, but it's really brought it home, is the difference between business travel booking and business travel management. And so we have, through increased use of technology, for a lot of companies, it's become a very automated online booking process, untouched by human hand and so on. But actually, through the pandemic and what we're seeing now is, similar to Josh's point, it's actually the people behind that. So actually having someone who, when something goes wrong in the middle of the night and you want to pick up the phone to your business travel agent and talk to a human being, the account managers who advise you on your corporate travel policy and the well-being of your staff, and the technology experts who can reconfigure the technology quickly when rules and policies and things are changing on a week-by-week basis. The importance of those, the people who actually help manage those travel programs, I think has really come to the fore. We've certainly seen a lot of people who didn't have managed travel in the past, booked it themselves, coming to travel management companies and saying, we need help now, we're not happy doing this. So that overall package and all the human beings involved in helping to manage that business travel, as opposed to just booking it, I think that's something which has always been there, but it's really come to the fore now, and something which I think is just going to grow and grow going forward.
So the machines haven't taken over yet?
Sorry?
The machines haven't taken over yet?
Not yet. Or when they do, that they stop working when things get a bit strange. That's the problem.
Very good. So thank you very much for that.